This is Canon Fodder, episode 34, live from Vietnam, but actually live from the depths of space. When, we're not sure because of time dilation. We are, of course, talking about Joe Haldeman's The Forever War. And with me this week, my good friend, the outgoing misanthrope. How are we doing, Tom?
I am doing great. So happy to be back.
So when we originally discussed Starship Troopers, I brought up The Forever War as a kind of coda, and you'd mentioned that you'd met Mr. Haldeman actually from sort of a chance encounter, and it apparently really affected you. So I wanted to have you on, not only to discuss this book, but also to put your story out there, because I doubt that it's something that really comes up all that often for you.
Yeah, and it was funny too because I'd not read the book, and when you mentioned it, that's kind of jogged. I wasn't just sitting with that in the chamber because Starship Troopers is, in my opinion, the better book. And I know many would disagree justifiably. But it
Well,
was just this
Heinlein
thing.
actually would disagree too.
Totally. And it's one of those things where I like the art. The artist can go pound sand, but I love Starship Troopers, which should have come clear in the other episode, but I never followed up on Forever War. I just knew this as kind of like a trivia, like a data point to throw out when you're drinking with some, strange person in a bar after midnight. Like, oh, I actually met this person, but I never felt compelled to read it. And then after we talked, I went out and found it, and we can just go from there. But it's one of those wonderful times when, like, you realize that no matter how old you are, you can still find new things that you're going to appreciate very deeply.
And that's what I've found doing this show is I can, if there's a bingo card of Hudson talks about how he's not well read, uh, I always used to consider myself well read until I started doing this show, and people were recommending books that I just had never heard of, writers I'd never heard of, and yeah, this book I actually read when I was in college, as because I'd heard that it's a good follow up to Starship Troopers. Before we get to that, yeah, I'd love to hear your Haldeman story.
Well, there's a lot of them too, and I gotta obviously got to filter for a number of reasons, but there's a few things about Haldeman the man that you have to understand is that you are never you can try your entire life and you will not even be half as badass as this guy is. And you have to understand too that I met him in his dotage. Like, this is not the guy who came back from Vietnam like Frankenstein. It's not the guy who took the literary world by storm, and it's not the guy who taught at MIT. He was an old man who knew what he liked and just did it. Every minute of that guy's day was exactly what Joe wanted to do. He could never be compelled to do anything besides what he wanted to do, and even in his age, he still wanted to do things. So it's not like he was unfun, but I just got the sense out of him that was just like life was for him to enjoy. And if the rest of us went along, so much the better. And then, and I didn't know who he was from Adam. When I met him, I just knew he's this old guy and everybody was very deferent to him. And I just couldn't care less at the time, just different me, different life. But he was just so wise, just didn't say a lot. And when he did say it, he said so much. And it was always in between the words too. He just has this very even delivery, and which we have to broach the subject, knock on wood, but he's still alive, which is mind-boggling for the life that guy's lived. But he
80
just had
years
so
young
much.
at this point.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And I really want to share a quote. Let me think about it. Let me get up the courage to share a quote. But he is very much a white wine at breakfast, red wine at lunch, whiskey at dinner, and vodka for dessert. And you may think I'm being like colorful with that. I mean that almost exactly. It was impressive watching this guy put it away to no appreciable effect on anything. Like, you didn't seem like he'd been drinking all day. And he eats, and he's a normal person, but it was impressive to see the
He
level.
eats just like everybody else. He puts his
Like,
pants on the same way.
yeah, 2 holes at a time. No, it's just, you think with that much anytime I've ever seen anyone else drink to that level, they're an alcoholic on the side of the road, and all they do is drink. They get like all their sustenance from the booze. They drink like port and and like malt liquor, and it's like their whole diet. And he put away a lot. And I know that's common with a lot of the artist types, and especially when you get to that age, it's kind of like he needs it, I guess. But you go back, and this is where I want to transition away from Haldeman the man to Haldeman the author, is when you'd see this old, wizened dispenser of information, you have to understand that the brain is still a young man in his 20s that went to Vietnam, that didn't just go to Vietnam, got the shit end of the stick at Vietnam. And he never, and anyone can fact check me because it's not something we talked about a lot. He didn't talk that much a lot. I just listened when he would talk, but he was not some kind of combat guy. He wasn't like a Navy SEAL. He wasn't doing, wasn't an 11 Bravo. I believe he was in a support role, but he did get screwed over and he got blown up. And it was one of those things where he got blown up, and the next thing he recalls, he's like in Hawaii, getting put back together. The man got blown up. And I know people say that, and I don't mean to minimize it, but like someone blows off their foot and they say, I got blown up, and that's fair. But no, he got destroyed. Like one of those ones where he only alive because modern medicine and super glue like got to a place to keep him alive.
And to be fair, he was a combat engineer, so that's
Okay, so
that's
he's
a
an
little
engineer.
bit more than
Okay, I didn't even realize.
the paper pushers.
He portrayed it like I was there doing a thing, which of course kind of tracks, right, with any of those guys. Like, but yeah, so I didn't know. I haven't looked him up, and honestly, I'm not playing here. Like, I didn't even think about Haldeman until we had the conversation, and then I kind of went back and reignited some of these things because at the time I didn't even like. He wasn't the most interesting person to me back when I met him, which is embarrassing because he's obviously one of the coolest people I will probably ever meet. But he was just so, and he's not humble either. He does not do that fake humility thing whatsoever. He's like, he's someone that would say, I'm the coolest person you're ever going to meet. And he would say it in a way where you'd believe it because it's correct. Like, he wasn't like ostentatious with it, but there was not a humble bone in his body, and he knew what he was good at and he knew what he liked. Just fascinating. I'm going to talk about him all night. But the scars on this man are insane. Like, when his body is just so beat up, and the fact that he is the age that he is, just, it's mind-boggling. But he comes out of the Vietnam War, and I believe he wrote a book about it called, I believe it's called 1968. Again, I don't know his corpus that well, but he took everything he went through and poured it into what he did. And I think Forever War, I'm glad it's so popular. I bet he's got a lot of good stuff because he was a machine. Like, the time I interacted with him, his writing schedule was insane. Like, just, he was constantly generating work. And at his age, it was just nuts. But Forever War is this amazing thing, and I'm so glad I read it. I'm so glad I still love Starship Troopers more, but I am so glad I got to go through the awful experience of the Forever War, because I think I understand Vietnam now in a way I never would have if I hadn't read that story.
So the novel gets compared to Starship Troopers because, and I like everything you said there, but I especially want to key on the Vietnam aspect because it's probably the most important part of the book, right? And when compared to Starship Troopers is very clearly a World War II book, right? If you read, or rather, have you ever seen First Blood, the Rambo movie?
Oh yeah, actually, it's the only Rambo I've seen. The first one,
and
it's
it
so
really
good.
And you can watch like the second one, I guess. It's really the only one I think is worth watching, honestly,
You know what?
because
I lie. I
it's
saw the
not
one in.
mindless action.
Sorry about that. I saw the one in Vietnam too, but I was incredibly intoxicated, and we watched the director's cut with Stallone talking the whole time. So I don't remember. I think it's number 5. Yeah, that one's a diamond in the rough. If you watch it with him
The
talking.
one where he like destroys a guy with the 50 cal machine gun who's sitting in the Jeep.
Watching that movie, if you watch that with any person of Asian descent, it's an experience
Yeah,
unto
it's
itself.
I just want to kill all the Chinese.
And it literally is that, because I don't think he was at a good place in his life when they did that
No, he
director's
wasn't.
commentary, and it's just, it kind of shows. But he loved the movie. That's the one thing I do remember, that the 50 cal and the way he talks to the you bring in guns, like when he talks to the missionaries. But all that to say, I didn't mean to derail you. First Blood.
Killing's as easy as breathing.
We should just sit down and watch all of
Yeah.
them all in one go.
Anyway, um, I loved First Blood because Teasel, who is the sheriff of the town, he's a World War II vet, right? And he sees this Vietnam drifter, and there's this interplay between the two of them, and they're completely different experiences, right? And that's part of the betrayal aspect to the Vietnam War that those guys feel, is that their fathers, their uncles, maybe a grandfather served in World War II, right? Maybe even at that point, maybe even like an older brother, right?
Hmm.
That's more so Korea, right? But still, point stands, right? It's you go, you serve your country, you do your time, you don't talk about it, and then you come back, right? And two completely different wars. So the Vietnam era guys, they come back to a completely changed world, and they get no support or very little support from the guys who came before, who can't get it. Even guys who served in the Pacific, very similar theaters, right? There were no news crews on Guadalcanal.
Right.
You know, Ernie Pyle, who ended up actually dying in Okinawa at the Battle of Okinawa, right? It was pretty well loved by the troops, right? He was there as part of the propaganda machine, let's say, right? He
Hmm.
wasn't there to report on atrocities. They weren't. The Japanese were giving it as good as they got in terms of fatalities, and probably even more so in terms of war crimes, stuff like that, right?
Right.
So you know the addition of the media class, who is just trying to get a story and really propagating this America bad, young Maoist sort of thing. The World War II guys wouldn't have known what to do with that, I think. And so when Haldeman reads something like Starship Troopers, and then he goes off to Vietnam himself and comes back, he has to write a response to it.
Yeah.
And what I like about Haldeman the man is that there's no bitterness there. You know, he writes almost in the vein of, say, like an Eric Maria remark,
Yes.
where there's no, he's not blaming anyone. He is recording what happened. And I'm gonna have to read his Vietnam novel because I don't know if you've read Matterhorn by Carl Marlantes.
I have not.
It's probably, I'd say, the definitive literary work of the Vietnam War. Um, it was actually written like 2006 or something, because
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh,
it's
okay. See, that's super interesting then,
a,
because it's that far away
yeah,
removed from the event.
and it's a really long book. The guy was a Rhodes Scholar, and then his follow up book I have, and it's like just as long, and it's about growing up in rural Washington or rural Oregon. I think, yeah, so Columbia River Valley. So I think that's Washington, right? Maybe Oregon.
Yes, Columbia River Valley is both. It does Washington and Oregon. It's one of those beautiful places I'd love to go to, but I refuse until we liberate Portland and Seattle. But yeah, I'd love to go out there too. And it's amazing how much geography plays into good writing.
Definitely,
Um,
yeah.
and you see it with those guys too from that era as well.
That's just to endorse, I guess, Marlantes. Definitely, I think he might have either was nominated or he won the Pulitzer that year for that novel. Anyway, I want to read Haldeman's take on that, because uh, it sounds fascinating, and he wrote a hell of a Vietnam War book just as a guy in the guise of a science fiction book.
That's
So,
what's so yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
oh, sorry. Let's actually talk about the novel itself, unless there's something you want to add to that.
No, no, that's great. I did want to say a lot of what you said is so fascinating. It's very interesting. I'm looking forward to going back and listening to it and thinking about it, because you said a lot of very interesting things about the dichotomy between the guys that served in World War II and the guys that served in Vietnam. And then your diversion, which you didn't say anything about, but could do a whole episode, is the guys that served in Korea. And it's like this cautionary tale for the guys in Vietnam. And no one warned them what they were getting into, and they were overpromised, underdelivered. So that period of 40, 50, 60 to 70, it's just so fascinating and horrifying to see how quickly we went from fighting a war that gives you things to fighting a war that takes everything. And I'm not minimizing the losses of World War II. They were heinous. But for American soldiers, if you survived to the end, World War II gave you a lot.
Mhm.
Like, it gave you a lot as a man, it gave you a lot as whites, as Americans, as either Yankee or Dixie or wherever. It gave you a lot as everything. There was a lot to be had from that war, and that doesn't take away from the guys who it ruined. And I know every war leaves broken men. I get that. But not a lot of people walked away from Korea like better for it. And not a lot did that with Vietnam either. I'd say the exception of like the SEALs and a few guys flying jets, that war was just it was a net deficit across the board
Oh, I
spiritually
mean, it
and
broke the
technologically.
country, and you know, and that's such a it's so banal to say at this point. Like, it's so overwrought to say that Vietnam broke America,
But
but
we have to say it though too, and that's
exactly,
why Haldeman's
it
work is
really
so
did.
good.
You know,
It it colors the commentary that you get because we all get tired. Any of us, I think, roughly in an age group here, but Vietnam is kind of this like fodder for stories. You know, World War II is our foundational myth as the the communist country that I believe America is. Like, that's the Garden of Eden story, and then Vietnam is this dirty little secret. And as long as you talk about it like we are the bad guys and we're evil and we deserved it, you can
we
say whatever
lost
you want.
to the glorious communists in,
Right.
and we don't talk about Korea because we killed so many communists there.
Yeah, and we walked away like it. Korea is another thing. We got to do a third episode. I actually have a great book for you. It's not a fiction book. It's called "We Claim the Title," written by a Marine Corps. I believe he was enlisted and actually went Mustang up the hawse hole, as they say, or whatever. And I think he went officer by the end. But that's a fascinating book about Korea, and it
Oh,
really
see, the
gets.
Korea book that I always recommend is "This Kind of War" by T.R. Fehrenbach, No
I
Relation.
actually have it. I haven't
Yeah,
read it, but I
great.
do have it.
It's a great book, and it's a terrific retrospective on, uh, on the war as a whole. You know, actually, what we can do, uh, you and I, we're going to talk about the Manchurian Candidate as our Korea book.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
All
Okay,
right.
yeah, that's another one I haven't read.
So
I've only seen
again,
the movie with what's his face. So great. This works.
for all you listening out there who just love when I talk about logistics for other episodes instead of the episode itself, maybe I'll cut that part. And anyway, so Forever War,
Well,
right?
okay, before we do that, we have to do a third part because then you can stitch this whole thing together and watch the collapse and the decay. Because like at the end of the third episode, it's going to be a live episode. We're going to do a duel, and that's the way we'll end it. And obviously, the good guy, the main character, is going to survive. So I don't think either of us have anything to worry about.
Terrific.
Yeah, so I'd like to do this, and you can feel free to interrupt me here, but I want to just do the quick summary of Forever War. Is that
Perfect.
cool, or did you
Yeah.
want? Okay,
No,
so
I don't
Forever.
think it's kind of light on plot, I'd say, and we can do the beats, and then we can kind of
You know
get
what's
into the
funny
meat.
though is I thought that too, and I've already kind of laid this out. I'm not gonna do the whole spiel I gave you the first time when I read it because I was like emotionally damaged from it. But there's so much there, and it's just we are living in such a aesthetically and artistically bankrupt time because you could take Forever War and you could do a mini series, you could do a recurring sitcom, you could do a single standalone feature, you could do tie-in standalone features, you could do a trilogy. It's all there, but you have to have the ability, the cultural depth to understand that it's about Vietnam, to understand that it's about the American dream, to understand it's about hard sci-fi. And that's what's so fascinating to you because a lot of times you get individual things in sci-fi, like really great cultural commentary or really cool science perspectives, but the whole book has so much in it that is fascinating, especially when you understand it came out in 72, 73. It's so prescient, but not in
Actually, it
like
came
a
out in '74,
74. My mistake. Obviously, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but
which is also fascinating because that's right when Vietnam kind of ends. I think isn't the Paris Peace Conference around '74, right?
75 is the American end. That's when the out of Saigon stuff. But yeah, in my head, 73 to 75 is the dirty ending because 73 is when they claim victory and 75 is when they cover up the defeat. So, but yeah, it's and like everything with Vietnam, there's no hard lines. Like it kind of starts in 63, it kind of ends in 73. So yeah, no, I think that's a perfect marker. And that again, that makes it even more fascinating that He finishes the book before the war is even over, and he manages to encapsulate it, at least from the American soldier's perspective, so well. But all this to say, there's so much there. I know it seems thin, but the more I think about the book, and this is why I consider it such a good book, is that reading it was not a chore. The first 80 pages were a chore for me, but then after that, it just throttled me. And I think about it a lot. And I'm gonna put some airtime in here so you can cut this because I know you don't like compliments, but I felt a lot of the same way with Automaton in terms of like I read it and reading it was its own experience, and then I kept thinking about it later. That's the same way I felt about Forever War because I kind of went into it like, oh, I want to do an episode. I want to, I want to do more of this. This was fun, and I completely forgot we were going to talk about it because the book just took me away on a lot of levels. So all that to say, we start in the 1990s. A young man who has a really high IQ and does really well on tests is forced to go into the military. He's drafted because he's so smart and promising. Because the current government in the 90s decides that instead of drafting the dumbest, McNamara's morons or whatever they called them, they're going to draft the smartest from the upper middle class and the upper class as some weird kind of like, post-Marxist bullshit about not just taking the dregs of society. So he's thrown into a company, a mixed company, half women, half men. And they go up to the moon and they start doing all these crazy like workouts and calisthenics for space combat, interplanetary warfare. And they have open access to as much marijuana as they could possibly want. They can drink hard in their off time. And they are forced to sleep with one of their platoon mates of the opposite sex at the time every single night. There's a roster and they have to rotate through all of their female companions. And so that's where this book kind of drops you in. And so
And,
for
it's
me,
funny. So you're saying that Joe Haldeman predicted Barracks bunnies,
and it's so funny when you again because I'm reading
the
every
homie
page of this
hopper
book.
of H platoon.
He's a dirty dog. This is part of the quote I might tell you, but he's a man that appreciates women. So right, um,
So,
it-
but you mentioned the the sort of Marxist leveling out of society, so everybody has to serve, right? Your top tier people, your dregs of society, like,
well, the veneer of leveling.
or right,
That's kind of why I said post-Marxist because it's like, oh, we're gonna do this thing so it looks good on paper.
right. It's more a kind of a brain drain, and we'll get to that later as
Mhm.
society develops, or rather, kind of falls apart while these guys are away. But it's interesting that, of course, society at writ large, this kind of Earth one world government kind of thing, is going to think of itself as this giant machine in which people are easily replaced, and it doesn't so much matter. So we can take gifted physics students from the top universities and send them into the meat grinder because there's always going to be more physics students. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's so funny that these little elements we're talking about that feel very throwaway at the beginning of the book, they end up kind of charting the course for where this story goes. And the thing to remember about this story, we're gonna go full on into spoilers, I assume.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
Again, spoiler culture is gay, and we're just gonna go ahead and do the thing. If
From
you
this point
pe-
forward, though, y-
people, if you don't want to be spoiled or whatever, you shouldn't be listening,
right? But you could have listened up to this point, and if I've sold it hard enough, like I hope I have, I would hope that you pause it here, you go read it because
and then
it's so
come
worth
right
it.
back.
Right, literally, don't even do anything else. Just pause it and go find it, read it, and then hit play again. But so from here forward, we're just going to talk about the holistic work. But he sets the stage for this 1,000-year saga because it's not this like punctuated war. And this is I'm going to circle back to this, but like the Vietnam influence on this book is total. It's everything about Vietnam that you've ever heard of, that you've read, that you thought about. Like you can find some aspect here, and it's like the never-ending war. I know it's in the title, Forever War, but it's still kind of a shock when you see the years start to peel away within the story, and how you have a 25-year-old who's been fighting for 800 years from the outsider's perspective, or whatever the numbers are. So that element, though, it kind of it caught me off guard. Even though it's called the Forever War, it was still just like my mind was kind of blown when he goes into the time dilation aspect. And I know we've kind of sidetracked the sidetrack, but I want to go back and finish the summary and I'll be less detailed. So you've got all these smart people and they get trained and then they go to a new level of training that's even harder than the first level, and they're losing people. There's attrition in the training, which I guess is the dirty secret about the military. A lot of people don't realize, but people die in training all the time. There's more accidents in training than there is in like regular operations. And then once their training is complete, they are put on a craft and sent to the opposite of everything they trained. So they're trained in the coldest environment possible, and they end up in a
And they end
jungle.
up in the jungle. Yeah, that's
And
yeah,
that's
that's go
yeah, yeah,
ahead and talk about that's
yeah.
you're
So it's
always
just
fighting the last war,
yeah. So
right?
that
That's
element's there in terms of like the people in charge have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And you get this whole point too with the professionalism and the brutality of their instructors. Like these are truly hard men. Like these are actually Vietnam War vets, because he set the book in a time where the last real war is Vietnam, which is and that's a bold move for an author to be that on the nose. Like Vietnam vet uses Vietnam veterans in Vietnam vet book. Like you, if someone gave you that elevator pitch, you'd be like, this is going to be the worst book I'm ever going to read. But it's not, and he handles it so well. And I get there are a lot of people listening that the Vietnam vet to you is a person over 60, but I'm just old enough to remember when Vietnam vets still had strength in their arm, like they were still a force to be reckoned with,
and
at
he
least
was
in personal interactions.
and he was right too,
Oh,
right?
totally.
Because before 9/11, you're nobody's really going around thanking the Grenada veteran
Yeah, right.
or and the Desert Storm, Desert Shield guys. They had like a brief moment because it was like, yeah, America's back, but the Cold War ends and that fizzles away. And
It just wasn't a real war,
as soon
not
as
to
Gulf
the
War
outsider.
syndrome kind of pops its head in, and as soon as Oklahoma City happens, the Gulf War guys they get put away. Like they're suddenly all Tim McVeigh. They're all making up this disease that now finally they're starting to come around to it probably existing and probably really messing guys up. Uh, so yeah, I mean Haldeman really does call early on because he's writing this book in 73, published in 74, right? That
Mm.
yeah, America is or the world really, America especially, I guess let's say the developed Western world that is that he's kind of envisioning, right, isn't going to have a major conflict because one, the players are just exhausted at this point, and also because it's too traumatic.
Mm. Yeah, and I love how he kind of
And I
he
don't mean to use
manages.
trauma in the way that gay leftists do, but I feel like you can you understand what I'm saying.
This is a
So
safe space for us to use the English language the way God and Webster intended. Yeah,
and King James, don't forget King James.
but of course, um, he basically he blends so well the dystopian future is shit, like realistically, as well as the we are going places, because he's right at the tail end, in my opinion. I know people can argue forever about the time periods, but Haldeman is the bookend of the expansive future sci-fi. And I know there's stuff that came after that did the same thing, but you have this period of sci-fi where it's like, obviously, we're going to Aldebaran or whatever, we're going to other stars. Obviously, we're going to discover things that change life forever. Obviously, all this stuff is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And then when it fails to happen, which I have a pet theory, and I'm not going to explain any of this, but the string theory is what destroys science, both artistically and in real life. But outside of that, this is prior to the string theory revolution of scientific interpretation. So he still has that, whether it's Philip K. Dick or Asimov or any of the other classic sci-fi, where it's like, well, of course we're going to have massive generational ships and fly to different stars. That's just what we're going to do. This is the end of that time period. And so he still has it in the story, but it's incredibly grounded. It's very believable. And some physics spurg will explain why it's not believable. And I could not give less of a shit. In terms of the story, it's so believable, this world he creates. that it would go this way. Not that it's like an inevitability, but like the world works. His world build works. And that's a classic thing too, because world build seems to really suck these days. I feel like a lot of people don't put enough time and effort into making the world the excellent background it needs to be.
Oh, see, I would argue the opposite,
Hmm.
right? I think that most people, writing these days, are working so hard to make a cool, unique world with its own sort of stupid little rules, right? And these convoluted plots around this world that they really want to build, that the world itself actually suffers because they don't know how to do it properly, and also
Hmm.
the story sucks because you're left with cardboard. You're left with like stick figures on a MFA level painting. You know what I mean?
No, I'm not, we're not saying different things. I agree with you completely. There's too much emphasis on the world build, but an elegant world build is the one where you can nail it in a paragraph or less, and
Oh,
we're all
definitely.
there. And he
Now,
does that.
and I'm going to take you on a digression real
Go.
quick because I want to hear your theory about string theory, because I completely agree, especially when you look at, let's say, uh, the Einstein revolution of the 30s and 40s, right?
Hmm.
Or what Hawking does later on 60s and 70s, right? String theory, I think, comes around in like the 80s, right? But you have all of these giants of physics, right, who are spurned on, or they have all this energy from these new theories that come out, right? And
Hmm.
suddenly you have string theory, this sort of grand theory of everything come together, and it just sucks the air out of the room. Like everybody is either pro or against it. The close, I think the most recent thing we have is like membrane theory, which is just like derivative of string theory.
Yeah.
You have guys who are trying to kill each other over 11 dimensions versus 12, and
Yeah. Yeah. No,
it's 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 like all of the, you're completely right. Like all of the art of physics just died.
so I think it was intentional, and this is a massive diversion that you just got to cut me off
That's
when I'm not gonna.
totally fine. I am so fascinated by this. People are just going to have to deal with it or skip or whatever.
Well,
Because
I'm more concerned about handing off a really awesome idea and not getting to be participate in it. Like I don't care if someone else makes it. I just would love to be there. But this pet theory I have is that string theory is this, I want to say confabulated. I think that's a word. Maybe it's not. It's this giant maskrovka that's put in place because somebody trapped a demon in a bottle and started poking the demon and getting things out of the demon that like gave them massive status and power and wealth. But the demon got its revenge by slowly seeding reality with the very fibers that are going to tie us down as entities and drag us all to hell. And I know that sounds insane, but
no,
I mean it.
that's really funny because of course you see the stuff coming out of CERN where
Yes.
they had like a live feed and it cut to like this satanic ritual,
Well, so
and,
no, to,
and
to
they were like, oh,
clarify that
sorry, that
though,
was,
no,
oh,
no,
sorry,
you're pretty much there. Like, so the scientists went out and LARPed a satanic ritual on
right,
the property, like,
right,
because
and
they
and
and according to them, it was like a joke, bro. Like, we're just joking, bro. It's just a joke, bro. Calm
yeah,
down.
yeah, not
Like,
not that not that. Oh, we have no idea what happened there, but oh, this was just a joke,
and
and
it is,
all
and
all
you
of that's there. There's definitely a shrine. Like we cop to all of it, but it's just a prank, bro.
completely, and it's terrifying too when you look at like the whole situation because these are supposed to be like the uber materialists that don't believe in gods and demons, whatever. But you just like that's what you do in your free time. Like that's like the equivalent would be like if there was some other lab and they did this like big like Brandenburg Gate reenactment where someone like put makeup on their upper lip and they dressed up like Nazis and they're just like pretending to do like one of the 1938 speeches.
Well, and
And people would be like, "That's not fake. That's what you actually believe." You're like, "No, no, no,
right,
it's just a prank, bro."
it's
Like
just a
they
prank.
believe that, but then these guys dress up with like Baphomet like hats, and they bring a literal virgin out, and they like do all the stuff of a human sacrifice, and we all
Oh
just
God,
believe
what
it's a
is his
joke.
name? What is that guy's name? He founded Jet Propulsion Labs.
Oh man, we're gonna keep make me look dumb here. No, I know the
Not
person you're
J.
talking
Allen
about.
Hynek, because that was the Project Blue Book guy. Anyway, I'll figure it out later. But he was like buddies with L. Ron Hubbard for a while, and he was also like a devoted student of Crowley, and
Yeah.
he and Hubbard tried to do a Star Child ceremony, which is like a really wicked. It's basically they were trying to birth the Antichrist.
Right.
You know, it just
And
really
instead they
dark
got
stuff.
Elon Musk access. Yeah, I've heard that one. That's a good one. Now you think I'm joking. People believe that, and I'm sometimes on some days I'm convinced. But just to put a pin in the string theory thing, I do believe it's a complete and total can of bullshit. I believe it's this incredibly complicated song and dance to distract people from something. And now, whether I believe it's a demon in a bottle, or maybe it's because when you let enough diversity, trademark, into anything, all progress kind of calcifies and the whole system goes sclerotic and then it starts to decay. Whichever one it is, it just seems very clear to me that the point of string theory is to stop any kind of runaway development, any kind of chain reaction. And I think your point about Crowley, like the aficionados of Crowley, or the people that are doing these crazy things. Yes, L. Ron Hubbard is insane, and the religion that came from it is insane. But it's preferable
Maybe we
to,
should do
to
some. We should
Marxism.
maybe we should do some L. Ron Hubbard books.
I need to read something. I would know, but I wouldn't be afraid to do that at all. I just think it's just a big distraction. That's what I see it as, and whatever it's distracting from, I can't comment on. But I
Jack
do think it's
Parsons is the guy's name, by the
there. You
way,
go. That name
who
does ring a
founded
bell.
JPL.
And JPL's their whole story is fascinating, but you see this kind of mythical element flowing through everything until string theory comes along, and then they're like, serious hat, very science, like much reasonableness, like, and it's obviously bullshit. Like
Right.
obviously these people spirit cook, like they obviously do it, and I don't know why anyone would be shocked when you find tiny bones in their closet, metaphorically speaking, of course.
Yeah.
But
Oh, of
we
course, and disavow bad Tom.
totally. So
Part of me is like, oh yeah, this is some good stuff. I don't even care about Forever War anymore. Keep going. But no, we should get back
the
to the book.
temptation's there, and we should circle back at some point, because I did pitch to you and some other people the idea of doing a team project to kind of fictionalize this crazy thing about physics and the derailing of physics, and I think there's so much to dig into there. But if you want to cut all this out, that's totally fine as well. We
I
can
would,
talk about this at
actually, I
another
wouldn't
date.
be surprised if part of it was a reaction to the bomb. Now that I
Hmm.
think about it, like
Well, that figures
as
into my theory. My theory.
as a sort of we have to confound these people so much that we don't create something worse than the atom bomb.
So part of my theory is that the first gift from the demon was the bomb. And that's why, and if you dig into this, you can check me on this, you don't have to agree, but it's true. The process of nuclear devices is very poorly understood, and it has always been poorly understood. And if you ever get the benefit of talking to someone who is involved in that period, that's one of the first things they always say, is that we didn't really understand the whole thing. That's why we had to test so much, because there was this unpredictability factor.
Well, I mean, they
So,
thought they were going to blow up the atmosphere,
well, that was one theory, but there was a bunch of theories, because
or they thought
not that.
nothing was going to happen.
Right. So that's the one that's normally gets portrayed as that it's going to set a chain reaction and burn the entire atmosphere, or nothing's going to happen at all, and we just wasted the equivalent of multiple trillions. Not that one of those is right or wrong, but the fact that you have some of the smartest, most well-heeled and focused people not having a consensus, to me, that's the red flag that something is amiss. That you've got all these competing theories going on at the same time. It
But
just means to me that there's a lot of mystery. It doesn't mean it has to be arcane, occultic craziness like my, demon in a bottle thing. But what it does mean is that there's a lot of mystery and very little understanding. But you have the gas pedal of a global war forcing them to say, yeah, we don't understand any of this, but we do know that when we hit rock A against substance B, we get a very large boom.
they're
How do
very,
we
very,
weaponize
very
that?
F it. We'll do it.
Yeah.
We'll
And
do
so
it
then
live.
you have that, literally do it live. We got 3, let's test 1, drop 2. Like, that's what happened. And the demon gives them that gift. And of course, like any gift from a demon, it's more of a curse than a gift. And it creates this chain reaction where they got to poke the demon just right to get the next gift. But the next gift makes the problem that much worse. And now we're at this situation where the demon has broken containment in the underground facility. And it's like taken possession of a lot of people. and the hard barriers that have been set up by much wiser and more capable men who were led astray by the demon, have to be admitted, but they set up protocols that are keeping the demon contained underground, and the demon is slowly working its way out by all the minds it's infected and seeded the world with. And so all this stuff about like trans this or migrants that or global warming, all of this is this massive effort and conspiracy. There's a conspiracy hiding the effort to get that demon out, to get the right person with the right key at the right door so they can stick it in that lock. And once that door blows open, everything falls away. And
Well, I mean,
humanity
and
gets to
I don't know if
understand
you,
what it has done to itself. That's my crazy
I don't know if
conspiracy
you read,
theory.
I don't know if you read my article for the old Glory Club
Which one?
about the UFOs and how
No, I haven't.
UFOs are demons. Oh, it's I'm proud of that one. You should I'll
Oh,
send
I
you a link
will.
later.
And this is not, this is trod ground. I know nothing I'm saying is original here, but every time I see another perspective on this angle of the UFO as representation of that, I love it. I love it
Right.
because I feel like it's so much closer to true than
Yeah, and
everything else I read about
our
science.
buddy Mike Grayman
Mm.
had to retire from his project, which I was sad to see because he got too freaked out from this. Uh, R.I.P. Mike.
I say
Uh,
awesome, but like in the way the earthquake is awesome. Like it's
uh,
staggering.
anyway, to circle way back to the Forever War and to the audience, thank you for indulging.
Again, we
I
could
have
just
a
cut it all out too. Just
no, because I found it fascinating, and I think my audience is closer to my insanity than not. So I think they're going to find that at least quirky and fun.
well, and we'll
Uh,
see. We'll get a writing exercise in the future. If people really like it, we should sit down and do like a brainstorming session on the
Definitely.
string theory demonology and see where that goes.
So
Where did we leave off though? Where did
so they were training on the moon, sorry, they were training in outer space in the
mhm.
cold, right? And they get dropped into the jungles to fight the Taurans.
Yes. And so I'm gonna say this now. I was gonna wait till later because I had this like grand design of like working my way to this amazing conclusion that would make everyone impressed with me. But I'm just gonna say that this starts as a memoir and becomes like top shelf science fiction. And I don't know if he did it intentionally, but my little pet theory here is that before he wrote this book, I think he did 1968. I think he'd done some other stuff. He's a talented writer. He puts a sentence together really well.
He put a few different Vietnam books together.
Right. And
There's like
like
War
Eric,
Year was his first. This is his first foray into science fiction, more or
right.
less.
And Remarque did the same, by the way. We all know It's All Quiet on the Western Front, but I think he wrote like 7 or 8 that no one reads about, and I'd love to read them all.
Yeah,
But he wrote a lot about it. He was processing that war through lots of different works. It wasn't like he just wrote one book about it.
the Road Home is pretty good too, which is like the follow up to All Quiet.
And I need to read more because All Quiet on the Western Front is formative in my life. Like
Mm-hmm.
it was a book that shaped part of who I am. And you see this with a lot of these vets that have the skill with the quill because they can't just get it all out in one book. And if they can get it all out in one book, they were probably like Good Morning Vietnam guy. We're like in the rear with the gear and they saw some stuff, but they were able to get it all in one book. But the guys that actually went through the war, whether it's the 30 Years War or, GWOT, like it requires a few different sessions to process what's happening. But my pet theory here is that he started with like this was another session to help get what was inside out on the paper so he can process it. But along the way, he found a capacity to spin a yarn that's so much more than just this one man struggling with these terrible things. And it doesn't minimize how terrible they were. And I don't mean to minimize his work before, but I very much get the sense with Forever War that the book started in one place and ended in another. And I know we're not going to talk about the sequel, but the way he leaves it, for me, it is very obvious that this book was not a one-off. But I don't think he started it as a series. I think he started it as a one-off and then created this world, incepted this world that he knew he needed more space to unpack in. Now, and if people disagree, it's totally fine. I can see why people might not like the sequel. I thought it was the perfect complement. And so I wonder myself, and I'd love to ask him someday if it ever could happen, did you set out to start a series? or were you forced to write a second book just to finish the thought? Because that's my theory, is that he went out to do a Vietnam in space, and he came away with this whole universe.
And it's funny too because he has, I think there's like he has 3 or 4 books, or he has rather there's 2 Forever War books. So there's Forever War, Forever Free, and then I think he has a whole peace trilogy.
Yeah, and that is
Just based
he
on
says explicitly it's not part of the story. Like it's reflections on, and it's like that's why I didn't, because I was thinking for this I would need to read the sequel. When I read that about the third one, I was like, okay, I'm not gonna or maybe I'm messing it up and it's the fourth one. But whatever, one of the books that Haldeman put out in this universe, like he explicitly says it's not part of the story. It's reflections on the story. It's conclusions, stuff like that. And I have to
I'll
look
need
it up.
to read I'll need to read the sequel because
You have
it
to.
sounds interesting.
It just, yeah, it ties it up in a really weird bow, and you also see it go. It kind of buttresses my theory that this started as memoir with scientific characteristics, with sci-fi characteristics, and became sci-fi with memoir characteristics. Because the next book is pure hard sci-fi, but it's actually got that reflection of the same way Starship Troopers was a philosophy book, wearing a powered armor.
Right.
That the second book delves into that a lot too, in terms of what is time, who is God, what is life, like what is meaning behind all this, does suffering have a purpose? It gets into all that. I really enjoyed it. It's dark, but I enjoyed it.
So they fight the Taurans, right?
Right.
They have a sort of psychological urge to kill these guys, even though the Taurans have like no will to fight,
And they don't
right?
know any of this too. We're all speaking looking back, but at the time you have to remember that they're trained for the cold, thrown into the jungle, and they're given these images in their head. They have this urge to kill implanted in them using the most modern science at the time that can be Manchurian candidated. I'm sorry for doing that, but
No, it's fine,
with
and
this.
it's funny how much I took from this book without even realizing it
Oh,
until
so yeah,
years later.
there's so much in there, like all these little things that he put in, but there's some phrase that their CO speaks, and it turns them into these, bloodlust driven, but in very different. And from automatons, it's not coldness, it's heat, and it's laughter when you should be
Yeah, it's
horrified.
berserking, and yeah,
Yeah, it's the berserker thing. But the part that's so fascinating to me is that Command didn't know what Taurans were. They didn't know what they looked like. They didn't know how they were going to fight. They didn't know what they were doing. So they implanted these images just based on the most horrifying things they could think of. And it says in the book, it's in the text, that it was just totally wrong. It didn't look anything like the sim. This isn't like the simulations, like it's not at all.
I,
And some part of Mandela can step back from that moment, that turned onedness, and see how fake, how fabricated it was, but it didn't change his actions. Like he still kills with the bloodlust.
well, and it's funny. There's that episode of Futurama where they go to war against
Zap Brannigan, greatest
yeah.
general America's ever generated. Absolutely.
Zap Brannigan says, "We have no idea what they look like, what they sound like, or what their culture is, but we do know this. They said you look like dorks."
I know they go crazy with it too. And that's another dimension too, of just how uncreative American culture became. Because like if you don't know all this background literature that the writers do know, you think it's this really cool idea. Like there was a point in my life where I thought South Park was just the most interesting show. And then I come to find out
It
that
is
it's
kind of
just the most
interesting.
it's interesting in delivery, but it's so unoriginal. The
Oh,
plots, it's same
and
thing with Family Guy, same thing with Simpsons. It's not original. They're taking these amazing works, crystallizing them down to like nuggets, and then like jamming it all in your face with humor, which is good. It's great. I love it, but it's not like they came up with this stuff. They just
right,
found these beautiful things
on the
and they
one
used
hand,
them.
I'm like, oh, there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Like that's just like everybody is doing a creative homage to somebody else.
Which is
Um,
okay too, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just there's that moment loss of innocence where you think you've discovered something like
right.
new, and really it's like, no, this is timeless actually. Like this is your grandparents had the same process of discovery, and they got it from a previous generation.
So the company finishes their tour, right?
Right.
and they get back. They started in 1997. They get back to Earth, and it's 2024. So we
No,
should be
not quite
seeing
yet.
them
It's
any day now.
well, so it's yeah, right. They come floating back in. There's that period of I believe they leave in '97. They come back in 2008, or there's some events that occur, but Mandela and the rest of the survivors don't come back to Earth until the 2020s. So there
Right.
is a waypoint there, and that's
They
when the
come
time
back. They vote
dilation's
for
introduced,
President Trump,
right?
and then they
And
go back
this
to war like good good soldiers.
and they come back to Baron Trump, but he's had a sex change and everything went wrong. No, but they do come back, and this is a whole dimension of the story that's so fascinating to see life go on without the soldier. And this is
Right.
another vestige of the Vietnam experience where you leave and you're part of the conversation, and Vietnam is this faraway place. And then you go to Vietnam, you actually experience it, and then you come back, and the conversation's still going. But if anything, you're less invited to contribute now that you've actually seen it. And I think this was very real for a lot of people that served in Vietnam, because Vietnam, in the same way that, Iraq and Afghanistan were common conversation topics. And we'd talk about this stuff all the time. And then the guys would actually go. And I remember the first time I spoke with a GWAT vet, like back when the war was going on, and I was so underwhelmed because like I'm expecting this, like I've read Vietnam stories. I'm a young man, like reading war stories. Oh, I bet they're over there like mowing down the enemy with little bird helicopters, dropping
Right.
grenades and stuff. Like,
They're all
no, we
Sergeant Rock in
yeah, yeah,
the DC comics.
we're sitting in a green zone. The assholes shoot mortars at us. You know, machine guns shoot the rockets out of the sky, and the biggest danger we have is trusting
I got a
that little
medal for
kid
it.
to not blow us up, which is just so underwhelming if you think it's going to be this war story. So just that as an aside, whatever the guys experienced in Vietnam when they came home, their countrymen were not interested in hearing it. For good or bad reasons, it was just like I don't care what you've gone through over there. I've got my ironclad opinions on
And
the war.
I've got my own stuff going on.
Yeah,
Like
right. Like, did you see Kent State? It's like, yeah, I know you found 30 dead decapitated babies, but did you see what happened to those poor college leftists? Like,
and you've got so coming back from World War II, right? The men who because basically everyone fought, right? And
right,
you wouldn't admit to not having been in World War II, right? If you hadn't gone. And they basically take over society more or less. Like they take the reins of the economy, they take the reins of government. They found new companies, stuff, all the rah rah, go America 1950s post war boom, right?
right.
You have these guys who are the boomers, right? It's funny. The wrong boomers took over government, right?
You say that in the
It was
1940s,
no, no,
1950s?
no. I mean, like the guys who are in
Oh,
government now
from Vietnam. Oh,
from
yeah.
Vietnam, the wrong boomers took over. Like anybody who saw significant action, save for like James Webb, right? He's like the foremost guy I can think of when it comes to Vietnam vets who served in like government.
Yeah, but
Uh,
even he was wrong too because he was just so uninspiring when he finally got his chance in the spotlight. It was his makeup and eyebrows that people noticed. They didn't notice this incredibly heroic and diligent
yeah,
man, which he
don't
was,
forget,
by the way.
yeah, and don't forget, and his novel's pretty good too.
I have
Um,
not read it.
Pretty good, pretty good. Another Vietnam novel, not as good as Marlantes, but covering very similar beats. So,
But
um,
yeah, I love that theme you said about the wrong boomers.
so
And yeah, go
these
ahead.
guys come back from Vietnam, right? And it's like, oh, society's not for you.
Nope. You're no longer needed for this.
It's okay. Clearly we messed up, right? You messed up for kind of trusting us, uh, or for believing that you were doing the right thing. Because again, the story of Vietnam is that everybody was drafted, right? Like
Hmm.
it's the drafty war. One, there were more draftees in Korea. There were a
Yep.
lot of people who were not they volunteered under
Yeah.
the auspices of this is what my father did in World War II.
They chose to go. Yeah.
This is like height of the American Empire. Everybody talks about like I think it was who was it, Christopher Hitchens or Peter Hitchens? Somebody like that said the hippie movement of the 1960s was really only like 2 square blocks in San Francisco.
Absolutely.
Otherwise it was just like normal, well-adjusted kids who went and fought for their country because America was at the height of its power, and that's what you did.
Absolutely.
And the government took that, right, and they took that goodwill and they took the inspiration and like the optimism, let's say, and I'm painting with a broad brush, and also I'm giving them a lot of slack. I'm giving like I'm giving them a lot of credit, right? Let's say that uh, let's put away our cynicism for a second and say that they really did believe in the mission to civilize and to stop the spread of communism, right? And that American exceptionalism was real, especially at this point,
They
right?
believed in victory and they thought victory was attainable. That's
Yeah.
something that gets lost now. We always look back and like it's like everybody portrays that they knew the whole time it was a pointless war. Total bullshit. There was
Well,
so much to lose.
I'd say halfway through, right?
You think that's when it fell off? I see. I don't think it fell off till like 73. I
Well,
don't think people really woke up to the pointlessness of it
I
until they saw the enormity of the failure.
I mean, you have Hui and the battle
Uh,
in '68, or what?
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's the
The
holiday. Why do I always forget this? The Tet Offensive.
the Tet Offensive. Yes, thank you. Uh, and that's when it's a uh, not a strategic victory, but it's a military victory on the ground in terms of raw numbers. Tet Offensive fails, right? But because the intelligence wasn't there, because it was such a surprise to the journalists on the ground, you have Walter Cronkite saying that the war is unwinnable, right?
Right, you have this media loss. They took a tactical and strategic victory too, and I think it has to be said, and this is what really red pilled me on Vietnam, is that the NLF was so destroyed that when the 1973 talks start, they don't have anyone to send. Like the country destroyed the NLF, what's called the VC or whatever. We destroyed the Southern Vietnamese communists. There was still the North, but by the time there's actual talks, the US military and the ARVN, it must be said, because they got a lot better later on, had just utterly defeated the insurgency in the South to the point where, yeah, there were bombs going off, there were still assassinations, brutal killings, but there was no such scenario wherein they were going to win the war on the ground. And that war was won, it was lost by American politicians. And that's something that gets forgotten completely. It's like like the Vietnamese march to victory. Absolutely not. Now, I don't think they could have invaded the North and beat them up there. It would have taken another 15 or 20 years. So they win strategically overall. But Tet is this perfect microcosm of how bullshit the interpretation of that war was,
It's like
top to bottom.
it's like when what's his face Rothschild goes from Waterloo, right, and declares that the English lost, but they actually won. But everybody in London is selling their stock because they think that England is about to be invaded by France.
Right, and if there'd been televisions, it probably would have worked.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, it did work, but
In
anyway,
London, yeah. No, I mean,
yeah, yeah.
like, it could have turned it to a victory. Like, could you
Right,
imagine
right,
if Wellington wins, but then somehow Napoleon comes out on top because the
right, right.
London newspapers decide he should win?
It's like, oh yeah, and it's like, Wellington, what are you doing? You lost. Okay, let's take a brief pause. And the whole thing about the Vietnam War ending the way that it did, it's shit. All right, I have no way to
No,
transition
that was
back to what we
excellent.
were saying, so I'm just
Here,
gonna cut up until here.
no, I'm gonna pitch it to you. Is that the whole thing, that ending is that there's this massive disconnect between the war effort at home and the war effort on the front, and that'll tie us right back in if you're down to do that or however you want to
Yes.
make it.
All
But I
right.
thought that was a
So
perfect transition. I thought you were knocking it out of the park.
right. So and the part of the Vietnam War that is I'll kind of circle back to is that once these guys, because the media apparatus is so thick, because people have watched this war on television, the guys that come back, they get maligned as losers, so of course they don't want society, as Patton says, America loves a winner and it hates a loser, and it
Mm.
literally cannot handle a loss, right? And you kind of see also this shift to the State Department, rather than the Pentagon in some ways, right?
Right.
because the State Department, they were able to sue for peace. They were able to do this, that, and the other thing, right? And all the best and brightest start going over to the State Department and yada yada yada, like all this bullshit, right? Uh,
Absolutely. And that is a big change you see in Vietnam, is that it goes from the Pentagon being the top of war fighting and like foreign policy. And it does. It becomes State Department, Foggy Bottom, the NGOs. This is when that transition occurs.
but anyway, we've gone very far afield, and we've kind of we've hit everything but the target in some ways. Uh,
Absolutely. Area effect weaponry. But no,
but
this is good too, because you see one thing that has to be said about this text is that as war books go, it's got very little war in it. It's not this knockdown, drag out battle after battle. It's not this, weaponry. It's almost he's almost kind of like blasé about the technology. Like, oh yeah, and we have these, tachyon bombs. They're really big. Wow. Let me go back to describing this other thing about, the human experience. It doesn't make it a bad war book, though. In fact, if anything, it makes it more visceral because, of course, to a guy that fights in power armor and can like literally tear people apart, that's just that's his day job. That's not
it's
what he's
kind
going
of
to talk.
banal for
It
him.
is,
Yeah,
and you see that too, and I really love the transition. It's jarring when you read it, but looking back, I love the transition when he comes back and his mom's old, his dad's dead, society is shit. It is bad. And it's not even like exciting bad with zombies and a new like a war at home. And I
it's
think he
literally fake and gay.
it is. It's the definition of fake and gain. Everything is terrible. And Mandela as a character is incredibly even, almost flat to the way he deals with stuff, which I find so realistic. That he's not emotionally, he's not going crazy. He doesn't like start a movement to fix the world. He
He's
experiences a
tired.
little bit. Yeah. And
He experiences a little black girl magic, and he gets tired real quick.
and but he's got this thing, which is his partner, and I mean that in the professional sense. It's like one of the only other soldiers in his original unit. They forge this connection. They both see that the world has nothing for them, and if there's any doubt about it, their last tenuous connections to Earth get ripped away from them. So they re-enlist and they go back in, and then they go into a whole different war. And this is where the time dilation feature of this story is so
It just
cool.
gets cranked up to an 11.
It
You
does,
know,
and you
like
can't act like it's out of nowhere because he says at the beginning, like, for you it's an hour, for them it's 10 years. So this effect is there, but he brings a realism to the distances being traveled. And so if you're doing the math in your head, you're like, wait, don't go, don't go. Like if you go, you're gonna lose everything, even more so than you already have. But they go because they don't have anything to go back to. They're carrying with them everything that they are. And one of my favorite parts of this, and we're jumping further down the story here, but when they're on the way to the last battle and he's gone up to major, and that's a really cool aspect of this, is that it's very much like a military man would. He breaks it up into the ranking section where he goes from private to sergeant to lieutenant
mhm.
to major or colonel. I forget where he ends up, but you got this guy who is the veteran's veteran. He was there on day one. He was there in battle one. Like you could not craft a more experienced and capable soldier. And he's not. He was like, I was there. There were some explosions. I got my leg blown off. That was it. Like it's this incredible monumental battle that propels his career forward. And for him, and this is his this is when he's a lieutenant. He goes in, he's got his company, and the fucking landing craft gets shot down. And then he wakes up on what they call heaven, the hospital boat.
Right,
To me,
right.
it was such a slap in the face because you're like getting geared up for this next battle and like, what's changed? What's different? Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. Like, the thing turned in. We got hit by a missile. I
But
woke
we
up. I was
won.
missing a
You
leg.
know, hey, we won. Yeah,
And it's
it's
just
like and it's so. We talked about this last time, actually, when we were talking about GWAT, but the Lone Survivor film,
mhm,
where the SEALs are doing quick reaction force, and they're about to drop out of the helicopter, and they're gonna send the kid who is like it's his first taste of
yep,
combat. He's gonna be the first one out of the helicopter down the rope, and then they all die because they get hit with an RPG.
yep.
and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, that's war. That's what war is. It's
Yep.
it's everything that you've been training for your entire life, just for you to be snuffed out before you hit the ground.
Yeah, and it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Right.
And Haldeman captures that really well about the big green machine in that,
There's
like, yeah,
there's
that
one
happens too.
aspect. There's one aspect of that I really enjoyed. It's he has a medical officer, because everybody's, and we should get to this point. At this point, Earth is so overpopulated that everybody has to be gay.
Well,
That the
let's
only
hold on. Let's build this up real quick. So he's a lieutenant. He doesn't even fight in this huge battle. That's a massive battle.
Mhm.
He then gets sent to heaven, which is the planet where they repair the soldiers or do anything. And in the time dilation from the time he goes to the battle as a lieutenant, gets messed up, and then flies there, there's been this massive amount of time. From there, he then goes into his training, and then he flies out to another position, and that's when we drop into gay Earth. So I
Right.
know I'm being pedantic, but
No, no,
for
it's
me,
fine.
it's that
It's fine.
gap. Yeah, where we go from Earth is a humankind is this multi-system entity, which is the goal for people like me. Like, we want to be orbiting as many stars as possible. So it should be this really cool thing. And he like falls asleep with Earth as the main place and some bases, and then he wakes up and the war effort has expanded massively. And then he falls asleep and he wakes up and shit is so bad everybody's gay. Like, and it's just there's no time to process any of
but
this.
but my favorite part is he's talking to like the medical officer who gets drunk with him one
Right,
night,
right, on
and
the on
and
the
she,
on the swill that they're making in the kitchen.
she's suddenly she's fascinated by the idea of having heterosexual sex with him,
After
and he's
having
like,
said it's so disgusting and
right,
unnatural too. They've
right,
built that up.
yeah,
But then you got the first opportunity, she's dropping her clothes.
right, and he's like, note to self, oh, I'll have to figure that one out later, and I'm like, oh, Haldeman, you dog. Yeah,
Well, and
it's just,
it's a
it's
great thing too. They call him the queer, which is
right,
such a
right.
funny reversal because he has the strangeness of
This guy likes to have sex with women.
I know, and it's like, ew, procreation. What is that? Because they're all decanted. Like none of them are born. They come out of a machine that has a supercomputer that decides like need more human, create one, and born gay, which is just so unfortunate across the board. And I think this is a good time to talk
Good
about
thing
how,
that'll never happen
yeah,
here.
right, we're safe
Like
from that,
good thing that's only
thankfully.
science fiction.
This world is so shit. He creates this terrible, terrible world. And I said this to you when we first started talking about it, is I hated this book. The first like 80, 100 pages, I was like, I want nothing to do with this story. This is such a like soldiers smoking pot, like women in the military. What is this? And then it's like goes to like gay world. What's going on? This
Like
is so
hippy
terrible.
dippy bullshit is
It
it,
is.
and you're
It
like,
just it
oh, it hits you finally. You're like, oh, fuck.
well, it is the this too shall pass too, because you never land at no point, and you'll see this when you read the sequel too. At no point do we arrive at utopia. Like every new horizon in this fiction suffers from the same sickness, no matter how much it's changed, no matter how many years you go forward, no matter how great technology is. Humans are terrible at doing the right thing. And even when they're successful, they fail at it. And he maintains that, which is pretty impressive given how like the changes, because there's that part we go all the way to the end of the book where the clones have ended the war, fixed everything, and all of these gays who think the CO is the old queer, the clones offer to correct them, to
Yeah.
fix
Oh,
them
yeah.
into
This is like, hey,
heterosexuals.
we fucked up.
And it's not even we though, because the clones are completely separated from the humans. There's none of this like you are our parents, like you created us, and while we far outpace you in all quality because you breathe life into us, we respect you. Which is like a lot of people use that kind of trope. They're just like, no, you guys are just a mess, like top to bottom. Nothing about you is done properly, but we can give you whatever you want. It's like, so you want to keep being gay, go to a gay planet. If you want us to fix you, you can go to a breeder planet. Like, or
and
you can become a clone like one of us.
what's funny about that too is that they're like, we're gonna keep you guys around just in case we messed up. Like
Hmm.
you guys are the break glass.
And that's an interesting point too. Someone said this to me, and it kind of broke me for a while. But you can never write a character smarter than yourself, which like destroyed so many of my ideas for books because I needed
Right.
characters that are smarter than me. I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Okay, but it shows you how smart
I
Haldeman
think
is
that's
too.
why I didn't write that. I think that's why I'll never write the Automaton sequel. I keep
Don't
trying
say it.
to.
Don't
No,
speak it. Don't speak that evil.
I just it
But
requires a better mind than I have.
you know where I stand on that. I think you should do the right thing. Whatever that is, you're gonna decide. But no, but the clones too, the way they keep the breeders around is this like it's very scientific and it just shows this brilliance that Haldeman the man has.
I mean,
That
Haldeman was like a physics student
right,
before.
he's not a guy that likes
He
space.
is William Mandela.
He and in many senses he is, but he also there's a separation he maintains between, and this is something that I aspire to, and I'm going to work at it my whole life, is to not invest myself into the artwork wholly. Like, yes, parts of you are going to get in there. And that's the point, right? People want to hear your voice. Assuming people want to read what you have, it's not like they're going to get angry that they find you, if they know you, if they find you in the text. But the execution of creating a thing that comes from your mind, but is wholly separate, to me, that's one of the things that divides good writers from great writers. And it's why, honestly, I don't like memoir. I know there are good memoirs out there, and I still assert that this started as a memoir, but it becomes something that's so much more than just a memoir. It's its own world, and he does such a good job of that too. Because if, in my case, I knew who he was going in, and I knew his real history, so I could see those connections. But it didn't take away from it. It doesn't trap Forever War as just Vietnam in space. And it's not. It goes so much further than that. Even though that does, and it's a positive thing that it starts as Vietnam in space, but it becomes its own, sci-fi work. And one side thing here too, we see with like the tachyon bombs and the oh, what do they call it? Not the arrestor, the stasis field.
Mm.
Niven uses the stasis field. Big fan of Niven. There's all these really interesting elements that the writers from the time, they kind of share these technological things that are not real and have not happened and probably never will, but they still share this like common scientific language. It's really kind of interesting to
Yeah,
see.
they're like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? It's like, oh, here's the big effing thing. Oh, I'm gonna use the big effing thing in my story too. It's like, oh, I'm
And
gonna
it fits though
barely
too.
mention.
It
And
works, and that's one element too here is that warfare technology gets so advanced they're fighting with swords and arrows again.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like because they have to. Like, and I love that. I know some people might find that trite,
and
but
it's
I
funny.
think it's
I wonder how
fascinating.
much he took of that from Dune, actually, or if he took that because what Dune came out in '66.
It's in the window, right? Like we have this window of time where if an author tries to tell you, "Oh yeah," it's like I think I said this in the Starship Troopers, but I'm gonna hammer it because it's so lame. But the person that did the Mockingjay, what was that terrible Hunger Game,
Susan Collins.
tried to pretend that she didn't know what Battle Royale was, and it's just so bullshit. Like you admit it, just admit, it's a great story. We all know it. Like it's why I watch Battle Royale and I watched your dumb movie. It's because it's a cool concept. Don't pretend like you came up with it. Like just you modified it. And I never get the feeling with these sci-fi guys that they're going to pretend that everything's happening in isolation. Maybe they are, and I'll eat my words because it's like quoted as be like, I've never read Dune, which would be hilarious. But it wouldn't surprise me if it did influence him because Dune's excellent and it's a really cool idea that you get this far forward. So the only things that work are the old things. I think I'm going to use this right for once. The Lindy things of warfare.
Yes,
It's like
the,
they still work because they work.
spears. You never see those anymore.
Oh man, that whole scene too, and he does a really good job of keeping the Tarians, whatever, properly situated as to what they were, which is a hive mind that has
And
very
they're
little
also a
capacity for
race of
iteration.
clones too, which is
They are,
really funny.
and they're natural clones, which is so fascinating because that's a thing. That's a real thing in biology that you have, and it's not that hard. It's not crazy. Bees, termites, and ants. They are clones in a sense because they have a single source. There's multiple males, but they all come from the same mother. And so that's like a weird, like it just is a parallel. I know it's not perfect cloning, but there's a reason they all look so similar, and that's what the Taurians are. Is they are
So
natural clones for millions of years, and then when they interact with these crazy space monkeys, they have to relearn something that they have complete. There is no blood memory here. There's no warrior tradition. They have no way. And so everything they do is iterative off of the human weapon system.
And okay, so I thought that this book was going in a very similar, in the direction that it went, but different. I thought that they were going to discover that the Taurans were just a later because of the way that the time dilation works, that it was going to be a later iteration of man, the man being the clones.
I remember that too. I had that feeling that, we're going to, like a big reveal.
It's going to be
like
ourselves.
We're fighting ourselves. I'm so glad it didn't go that way.
I kind of am too, but it would have been
read the sequel. When you read the sequel, it gets a lot more fun. Like he put a lot of thought into it.
Because also at the end, we're told as the reader that this war was started in order to jumpstart Earth's ability to, like, basically jumpstart Earth's technological genesis. Right.
This is a great dovetail here, and I'm so glad you put it that way, because it's revealed in like the last pages that there was never any kind of. This is where Gulf of Tonkin comes.
It was all a big. It was a false flag.
It was, and they made
Jim
it
Morrison's dad was there, and he said that he got shot at, and then the doors.
But they have that moment where they realize, like, oh, there was never an initial attack. The whole Casus Belli was totally fabricated, and it feels like a throwaway. When you read the sequel, he really fleshes that out and justifies it. But for the first time I went through, I was like, man, what a kind of a letdown. Like, but not a letdown. It was just like there's Vietnam again. We'd gone far enough away that it was like Vietnam left the story and then it comes back in. But I know we said we wouldn't talk about it, but the sequel really handles this in a very fascinating way. And
the next episode that we do will be the sequel, I promise.
Maybe but honestly, you read it, it might not be worth it. But basically, the clones are not perfect. It is not utopia. Time dilation gives lots of people opportunities to decide how they're going to deal with regimes they don't like, because you can just hop in a spaceship, fly for 10 years, and come back, and it's 1,000 years later. You know what I mean? So those are the elements in play.
But it's really funny, because imagine, like, President Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He comes, like, his first day in office, and he's like, yeah, the Vietnam War, that was kind of a mistake, but hey, we got fortunate son out of it.
And that's the takeaway, and everyone cheers because Kennedy said it.
Yeah, and at the end of the story,
go ahead. Sorry, I'm
sorry. The end of the story, it ends on it's on a perfect note, because he and Mary Gay, who is the who, I don't know if we mentioned her name before, but she's his betting partner, who he ends up falling in love with, and is like the last sort of grasp of his original humanity. Right.
Yeah.
She and him they go off to one of the breeder planets, to one of the not fake and gay planets, and they have a son. Right.
Well, I'm gonna be pedantic here because it's so beautiful. So he goes to the last battle. His unit goes further than everyone else in the whole war, to the Magellanic Cluster, which, for the non-nerds out there, that's outside of our galaxy and right on the boundary of another galaxy. And so they're a whole bunch of firsts. Like, they spend the longest time in the not quasar or pulsar, whatever it is in terms of the astronomical feature they use to travel these distances. They do it for longer, they go further, they're farther away than anyone else. And then they come back, and they get back to the nexus of the war. It's not planet side, is it Gateway? There's a name for this planet, and it's where we start the story, and it's where we end the story. And it's gone from like 2 shacks on the side of a cold planet to this massive complex. And when they get there, there's just ships everywhere in orbit, landed. There's even Tarian ships. No understanding. They land, and there's a clone that's like, hey, thank God you're here. We've been waiting. And they are the last ones. Everybody else has come home. Everybody else learns what they're about to learn, that humans made clones because they needed them, because even the gayification didn't do what it needed to do. So they built these clones. They send these clones to war. And because of the nature of clones, the clones are the first people that can actually communicate with the Taurians. No, I'm not going to explain it, the author says, because the words don't exist, and even if they did, you couldn't understand them.
It's like, because fuck you, that's why. Like,
yeah, it is literally a because fuck you, that's why, and it works though. And then he's like, here's a pamphlet. This is going to explain everything you need. I'm going to give you 20 minutes to process. and then we need to make some decisions about where we're going to go from here.
I cast PTSD.
Yeah, and so he's going through all this, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, here, if you want, here's your entire record." And on top of the record is a sticky note, and he points out that the record is this pristine printed thing, but the sticky note is like about to crumble to dust, and it's like 275 years old, and it's Mary Gay, and she says, "Hey, like holy shit, bro, this is a lot to take in, but I've realized that I love you, I want you. There's nothing else and no one else. So whenever you get this, me and a few other of our bros, we're on a ship and we're constantly moving between point A and point B. And so, only this much time is going to pass every time we turn the ship around and fly back. Come find me. I don't care if you are the man that left me or if you're a 900-year-old doddering whatever. I will be your lover or your nurse. Like, see you soon." And it is so incongruous with the whole like bleakness of the story. And maybe I'm just a softie, but I loved that. In that moment, I was so thankful that like this
Oh,
trip
it's like,
ass
oh,
hoe
good. He
who'd like
ends it
slept with
well.
all his friends, like she was a good woman. She was the woman he deserved, that he'd earned through all that. And I know that's like a shallow modern takeaway, but it's just so easy to write faithless women because we
Right.
see them everywhere. But he decided, this man who's very interesting history with women himself, like he very naturally inserted this character who is so believable at this point. It is not like, oh, that's a cherry on top to make us feel better about how crazy this is. No, it makes perfect sense.
And
She figured it out too because he figures
sentimental.
it out earlier. Oh,
It's
sorry, I
not
didn't.
steeped in sentimentality, right?
No,
Because
no,
she's
it's
a
it's
soldier
cold.
just as well. Like
Yeah,
it's so matter of fact, but it's so earned because they're both they're literally the only living people who can understand one another.
and they come to this conclusion independently, and it's such a great payoff because he comes to the conclusion, and he's like, I'm surrounded by faggotry, and I'm all alone. And I really, of all the things I've gone through and all the things I could have and all of this, I really just wish I
I
could be
miss
with
my
her again.
gal.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just because, and it's not even the sexual thing's part of it. He doesn't hide it, but it's just like, it's the only other human out there. No one, and he never says that explicitly, but that's the takeaway. None of these are humans. They look like humans. They sound like humans. They even act like humans sometimes, but they are not human. I am human and I am alone. But out there somewhere, there is this other human. And I really wish I could have spent more time with her.
so I
And
think I
then he
want to
does.
end it there. Actually,
Yeah,
I
and I have so much other BS about Marxism and Haldeman and this, that, or the other thing. But it's a perfect place to end it because that's where the story ends. And I loved the sequel, but you don't have to read it. The book,
I'm
you'll be
gonna
totally
read
fine
it.
without it.
I'm gonna read it, and we'll talk about it possibly if I like it or if I think there's something rich there to mine. Uh,
Awesome.
Tom, where can people find you, and how can they support your work?
I I do the Substack thing, and uh, if the fates allow, I will hopefully have some offerings coming up here, and of course, I'd love for everyone to buy it and put my name on lists, and I become sail off into the sunset on the earnings of my book. But more importantly, I would love to keep putting things out for people to read. So if you like politics and stuff, please come on the Substack. Tell me where I'm wrong. I've got a lot of work that's going to be coming out over the next few months, and if things work out, I'm going to have a couple books for people to go through and criticize, and that's what I'm looking forward to. But I spend a lot of time online when I'm not working, and there's just so much good stuff to read. So you can look at my stuff if you want, but find the people I'm insulting and mocking on like jiving with on Twitter. Go read their stuff. There's so much good stuff to read out there right now.
And as for me, you know where to find my stuff. You know how to support the Double Dealer. If you go to our Substack, you can become a paid member. We have 9 paid members at this point, so that's 9 episodes of Canon Fodder I get to do with you good people out there. Very excited for everything that we have coming down the pipe. If you're listening to this episode or issue 13 of the Double Dealer magazine should be out for purchase, as well as our White Boy Summer Apparel poolside reader. Can't wait for that one. A lot of good stuff there. I'm really bad at ending podcasts, so I'll just say insert ending here.